Simon was a common name. In fact, it was the most popular Jewish name in the first century. I guess that's why there were so many of them mentioned. In Erdman's Dictionary of the Bible, he says that there are 9 Simons in the New Testament. I can only think of a few myself. So I came up with Simon the Zealot, a disciple of Jesus, Simon the brother of Jesus, Simon of Cyrene, Simon Magus, you know him? He's awesome. A little dangerous, but still. Can you come up with anybody else? Well, yeah. Today, of course, none other than Simon Peter. But we're missing some others, so I don't know. We'll have to go to Ken's Bible study. Simon and Garfunkel? Simon Says, literally in my car right now. A lot of Simons, but we're talking today about Simon Peter. Like Paul, who was Saul, Abraham, who was Abram, Sarai, who became Sarah. Peter started off as someone else too. He was a Simon not unlike any other Simon. Until, of course, Jesus gets a hold of him and his life changes. So too does his name. But before that, he was just like everyone else. Common. Just like his name. Just another reason why Peter is so relatable. He's every man. Nobody special, and yet somebody special. Chosen. This fisherman turned fisher of people, this coward, sinner, doubter, denier, disciple, saint, pope even. Such a juxtaposition of all the things, of all the people, all of us. He really is the perfect person to follow Jesus precisely because of his imperfections. And as he follows Jesus, we are following him. Peter's got a wandering heart. He's pure in so many ways. He lets his emotions show. I always imagine Peter as a big man. You know, like a big, gentle guy. Sometimes clumsy. Thanks to the writer of Mark, I can't help but see him as kind of clueless. But at the same time, there's something that's just so authentic about him. He's always so eager to please Jesus, like a puppy dog, you know? I picture him like a big St. Bernard, old St. Peter. He's kind of oafy, you know? I see him jumping off the boat, eager to get to Jesus, like a big old St. Bernard jumping in the water, not fully comprehending what he was doing or why, but he does it because he wants to prove his loyalty. Good old Peter. He's always at Jesus' side until, of course, he isn't. But even then, he's so human. His foibles, his fall, his willingness to get back up again. He wanders his way around the Galilee, following Jesus to Jerusalem, brave and scared. This perfectly imperfect guy who happens to be Jesus' first pick for the team. Says a lot about who Jesus is and who he wants around him. Ordinary folk. And that's why we love him. And I really think that's why Jesus loves him. Because he's not perfect. Better, he's human. We too have wandering hearts like Peter. We too find ourselves scratching our heads, wondering, what does it all mean? We too find ourselves in awe, captivated by Jesus. And even when we are afraid, we are willing to push through to show our allegiance. Though we have to admit, we're full of doubts. Sometimes we're ashamed of it. Simon, the everyman, the chosen man. Jesus picks him and us just the same. So we began our journey on Ash Wednesday as Lent began, and then our journey really got going when we met Peter and his fisher friends at the Galilee. The man who readily declared, "I'm a sinner," warning Jesus of what he was getting into so he could make a better choice early on if he wanted. But Jesus didn't care. No, it was not perfection or piety that he was after. He wasn't looking for intellectuals or the elite. He chose the real and the raw. And Peter absolutely fits that bill. Last week we met Jesus and the gang in the middle of a storm. Jesus had been off praying all night, and in the wee hours of the morning he went back to find the disciples whose boat had been pushed way offshore by the winds and the waves. So in order to get to them, he walked on water, like you do. So Peter attempted to do the same, and while he was actually successful for a few steps, he found himself nearly drowning when the winds picked up. So Jesus held out his hand, and the two of them walked their way back to the boat together. It offered us a whole lot to unpack as we explore our faith through Peter's experiences. So there's a lot of insight to be had in that encounter, and I hope that this one will reveal some more insight for us today. Incidentally, my little advertising moment, you can always catch up on the series. You can watch our sermons on our IUCC YouTube or our Facebook channel. Both can be accessed through our website so that you don't miss out on what we're doing this season. But here we are today. Jesus and the disciples have just arrived in Caesarea Philippi, not long after another feeding of the multitude and a warning against the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And Jesus wants to know what people think about him. He knows they're not going to tell it to him to his face, right? You got to have some trusted advisors to ask, what are they saying about me? So that's exactly what he asks. What are people saying about the Son of Adam? Now, he says this as a third-person reference to himself. But I thought it might be a nice time to take a moment to focus on this phrase, Son of Man or Son of Adam. Anyone ever have thoughts or questions about that? Jesus is always talking about himself in the third person, especially in the Synoptics. That's the first three Gospels. He's not a big I guy, like he is in John. John, I am the way, I'm the life, I'm the true vine, etc., etc. But I think here in the Synoptics, he doesn't do that because he's humble. In some ways, it's part of his humility, or perhaps it's a part of his mystery. But I wanted to take some time to at least talk about this title because before I studied the New Testament in grad school and then in seminary, I was honestly kind of confused about those words. And to be honest, I still am. And this will explain why. Here's what I know. This phrase, son of Adam, was used multiple times in the Hebrew scripture. And it means son of man. Because Adam is man. Since one of the creation stories in Genesis tells the story of the creation of the first man and the first woman, we started assuming that Adam was a proper name, Adam, but it means man. So it's just man. And those can basically be used interchangeably. So the term in our Hebrew scriptures occurs over 100 times and simply means man. Son of Adam, son of man, that just means a man. It didn't mean Messiah. It did not mean Son of God. It's just human. So when I hear this, I think, yes, this is Jesus asserting his humanity. And I love it because it is so in line with the Jesus I know, especially in the Gospel of Mark, who denies all claims of divinity, who rebukes those who try to worship him, and silences anyone who would call him a Messiah, telling them, shh, don't tell anyone. This really works with my theology and what I believe about Jesus. But I do think you should know that in the New Testament, when the phrase Son of Man or Son of Adam occurs, which it does 81 times in our 4 canonical Gospels, and 69 times out of the lips of, or at least attributed to the lips of Jesus, the article appears before it. So it's the Son of Man. It becomes more of a title. And if you look at the Septuagint, that is the Greek Hebrew scriptures, basically the Old Testament, not written in Hebrew, but written in Greek, there is never an article in front of that phrase. It's never the Son of Man, it's just Son of Man. So maybe there is something that's more special about this term in the New Testament. Maybe it does imply Son of God in a more divine way, or Messiah in the Hebrew interpretation as anointed one to redeem Israel. I don't know. What do you think? Tell me after service, not now. But let me add to it that scholars think that nearly, if not all, of the instances that the phrase occurs on Jesus' lips, it's not actually authentic to him, but rather to the writer or the community that the stories came from. So that leaves us to ponder the meaning. So now you see why I'm still confused. But at least we all know what this phrase, this title was supposed to mean that we hear so often. So I still really like the idea of interpreting Son of Man or Son of Humanity as a way to universalize Jesus as a human like every other human. But whatever the exact intent of Jesus, or let's say really the writer who puts those words in Jesus' mouth, it appears that at a minimum, it means that Jesus is using it as a way to reference himself in the third person, which is in accordance with the way it was used every time in the Hebrew Scriptures. It was always a third person. So we could just leave it at that. But all of this is to say that Jesus questions the disciples, what are people saying about me? And so the disciples answer him. Some say John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Okay, thinks Jesus. They think I'm one of the dead guys come back to life. I imagine him wondering this. Forget about the fact that Jesus was a contemporary with John. John had just died after they said this, so I mean they were alive at the same time. Did like John's spirit get in his body or something? I don't know. They thought it was resurrected John, resurrected prophets, all these things. So since people are saying all this, he says, so who do you guys say that I am? And I translate it that way because who do you say that I am in English does not reveal that the you is a plural. So he was speaking to all of them. Who do you guys think I am? Now Peter answers, perhaps because he is eager to please Jesus, and like a third grader, he knows the answer. He quickly raises his hand, me, pick me. And he answers first. Or because perhaps it's that he's the spokesperson of the rest of the disciples. I like to think it's a bit of both. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus, apparently proud of his answer, responds, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Good job, 5 stars. You got the answer right. And then he continues to praise Simon, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven, and rewards him with a new name and keys to the kingdom. It's like you bring home your good report card and your dad gives you the keys to the car. I guess Peter really was the best student. He aced that pop quiz, nailed it. He's got an A+, a bonus even, with that new name and new role. At least that's how we've always perceived this passage. It's even labeled in many Bibles Peter's confession or Peter's declaration. It's always read as though this is Peter's personal belief and as though Jesus is rewarding him for getting it right. He got the answer right. But if the question was not, who do you say that I am, but more like, what are you guys saying? It's more like, what are you saying when they say I'm John the Baptist or Elijah or one of the prophets? What's your response back to them? So my friend and colleague, he's the pastor of one of the few other progressive Christian churches in Orange County, the Reverend Mark Davis of St. Mark Presbyterian Church. He writes this wonderful blog. I think I've shared it with you before. I consult it often. It's called Left Behind and Loving It. It's got a great title. What he usually does, though, is translate Greek. So it's a lot of exegesis. It's kind of heavy thinking because you're looking at translation after translation, and you're trying to figure out, what does this aorist mean? Is this is this conjunctive here? You just try to figure all this stuff out. So it's kind of heavy, but he's got a great name. And he took some time to look at this passage and really translate it and offer up some options for us. So he says, nope, it's not a pop quiz. It's a continuation of that original question. What are they saying about me, and what are you guys saying? So he looks at that Greek, and he realizes that it's not a what do you say now? What did you say? What are you saying? And so, since we always read it one way, now we can look at it with a slightly different perspective and hear them saying, what are you saying? Asking, what are you saying back to them? Pastor Mark says that Jesus is not asking them what they believe, which is the way we've always interpreted it. What do you believe about Jesus' identity? But something more like, give me a report of what's going on. What's the buzz? Tell me what's happening. And how are they contributing to that buzz in response to what they hear? So it's such a different way of interpreting the scene. And I think after looking at the Greek, he's probably right. This is not a pop quiz. Peter is not being rewarded for getting the answer right. Rather, he's getting rewarded for reporting what he's seen and probably for correcting people who think he's a dead man resurrected. Like, he's not John the Baptist. John was a wonderful man who he followed, but he's dead. Elijah, that's not Jesus. He's not Jeremiah. He is who he is. He's Jesus. A man. Son of man. So this might seem minor in some ways, but I think there's really something to this. And I had a lot of fun studying this week, and I thought I'd share some of that with you. Because, as we said last week, our faith is not dependent upon our beliefs. Remember we talked about that? There are no tests of faith. I made you say it with me. There are no tests of faith. That's not how it works. In this case, Peter does not get the keys to the kingdom because he told Jesus the right answer. He might be a disciple, a student, but he's not a third grader getting a star. That is not their relationship. Jesus is not grading Peter, no tests. I think that's really important because a lot of times we see our faith operating as though we're trying to get good grades so that we'll be at the top of the class. So we'll be the best, the valedictorian, the most successful Christian there ever was. So we too can get the keys to the kingdom. I mean, that's how it operates almost everywhere down the street. If I do this, I get to go there. But if we've been interpreting these words wrong all along, if we're not being graded on our performance, if it's not about becoming the teacher's pet, getting all the right answers, sucking up to the teacher, then that changes things. It's these shifts of interpretation that help us to go deeper into our faith. Just like last week when we moved beyond Peter as a disciple who almost could, but he just didn't have enough faith to make it. Sorry, Peter, you're sinking. No. But we shifted our understanding and our interpretation of the story. We learned things about Peter that ultimately help us to understand and act out our faith in a more authentic and I think more attainable and realistic way. So, I think if we might interpret this as not a question of what you believe, but what you are saying, and I suppose then a good question for Peter and for us is, are we saying what we believe? Are we being consistent? Now, I think the thing about Peter, certainly in the Gospel of Mark, but maybe throughout his portrayal, is this question. Does Peter really get what he's saying? I ask that question a lot. Does he get what he's saying? Do Christians get what they're saying? Does he know what he's saying when he calls Jesus the Messiah? Does he ever fully understand Jesus' ministry? Do we? But no matter, because Jesus sees Peter's authenticity. And here's where he renames him. You're no longer Simon. You're Peter. And on this rock I will build my church. So Jesus changes his name from Simon to Peter. Petros, of course, means rock. Petra, rock. So now his name is the Rock. Sorry, Dwayne Johnson. Peter got it first. But as you can imagine, with a name like The Rock, there's a lot of expectation. Much has been made of this line. Of course, this is how we delineate Peter as the first bishop of Rome, the first pope. It's the Roman Catholic claim to church supremacy, because Peter was the foundation of the church, and now all popes, even all bishops, all priests, all Catholics even, draw their lineage from him. But I think rather than make this about purity or primacy, which I think was never Jesus' intent with anything he did, if we are to interpret that Peter is representative of the church, then this is just one more confirmation that ultimately we are Peter. And Peter is us. He's the church. And perhaps Jesus knew it. It's almost a prophecy if Jesus ever actually made predictions. We will be loyal and faithful and strong. And, spoiler alert, in just a few verses, Jesus will call Peter a stumbling block. And so is the church. We not only stumble, but we can get in the way and cause others to stumble too. How often has the church been a stumbling block on our journey to Jesus? Too many times to count. But we're going to take on that passage next week. This is, though, perhaps the first reference to the church. You could even interpret this as the birth of the church before Pentecost. Right here on this rock with this human, this perfectly imperfect human. The church has its origins. This is where we are called to do the work to make heaven freed on earth, experiencing the kingdom. Thy will be done on earth. Whatever is loosed in heaven is loosed on earth. Peter, you got this. Church, we got this. It's because of us and our lives and our choices and our relationships. If we are Christian, part of the church, then we are Peter, and we have responsibilities. Now, of course, each of us has found ourselves in rocky situations. We found ourselves wondering and questioning our faithfulness, our abilities, our purpose. Surely Peter did several times throughout his life and ministry. We're going to face that head on next week. But even as Peter will have to face harsh admonitions, he has been called to be the rock, given a new name and purpose, chosen to experience the realm and work for it. And ultimately, he rises to the occasion, stumbling along the way, sure. But may we never forget that Jesus called him, trusted him, loved him, believed in him. So, Simon, not unlike any other Simon, Christian, not unlike any other Christian. Though in so many ways you are just another human amidst a sea of humanity, know that you have been chosen. And it's not because you are the smartest or the most religious or even the most faithful, but because Jesus sees you in all of your ordinariness and all of your uniqueness, and picks you, loves you, believes in you, and wants you to know him so that you can really follow and you can really lead. And we can really be the rock. We can really be the church. Amen.